Welcome back to Universal Insight. Please subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon for more updates. Why are there not more people talking about the Ninth Circuit's explosive Second Amendment victory, and what it means for California's gun laws? In the summer of 2025, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals delivered a landmark win for gun owners, sending shockwaves through the legal and political landscape of California and beyond. This decision was not made in a vacuum. It was the culmination of years of legal battles, shifting Supreme Court precedents, and mounting public debate over the scope of the Second Amendment. In a closely watched decision, the court struck down California's one-gun-per-month law in the case of Nguyen v. Bonta, a ruling that immediately drew national attention. The law, enacted in 2020, was part of a broader effort by California lawmakers to curb gun violence by limiting the frequency of firearm purchases. Under this statute, citizens were barred from purchasing more than one handgun or semi-automatic centerfire rifle every 30 days. Supporters of the law argued it was a necessary tool to prevent straw purchases and the stockpiling of firearms, which they claimed could fuel illegal gun trafficking and mass shootings. However, opponents countered that there was no credible evidence the law reduced crime or improved public safety, and that it unfairly burdened law-abiding citizens. The legal battle over this law was shaped by the Supreme Court's 2022 Bruin decision, which fundamentally changed the way courts evaluate gun regulations. Bruin held that any restriction on firearms must be consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation, not merely justified by contemporary policy goals or public safety concerns. The Ninth Circuit was compelled to apply this rigorous historical standard, setting a powerful precedent for all Western states under its jurisdiction. This marked a significant shift from previous decades, when courts often deferred to legislatures on gun control measures if they were deemed reasonable. This victory came on the heels of another major ruling, Roe v. Bonta, which had struck down California's ammunition background check law just months earlier. In both cases, the courts found that California's modern regulatory schemes lacked historical analogs from the 18th or 19th centuries, further eroding the state's strict gun control framework. The arguments in Nguyen v. Bonta were fiercely contested. California's attorneys insisted that the one-gun-per-month law was a reasonable response to modern threats, pointing to studies on gun trafficking and the need to prevent mass purchases. They argued that while the founders could not have foreseen today's firearms technology or social challenges, the state had a compelling interest in adapting regulations to protect public safety. Plaintiffs, on the other hand, argued that the law was a clear violation of the Second Amendment as understood at the time of the founding. They pointed out that there were no historical laws in early America that rationed the number of firearms a person could acquire within a set period. Their legal team cited colonial and early republic sources, showing that gun ownership and acquisition were largely unrestricted for law-abiding citizens. The panel's analysis focused heavily on historical context. They examined statutes from the 18th and 19th centuries, searching for any precedent that would justify California's modern rationing scheme. Finding none, the judges concluded that the law was a modern invention, not rooted in America's long-standing tradition of firearm regulation, and therefore could not be justified under the Constitution. This directly challenged gun control advocates' arguments for evolving interpretations of the Second Amendment. The court emphasized that constitutional rights cannot be redefined by contemporary policy goals, no matter how well-intentioned, if they lack historical support. The court affirmed that the right to keep and bear arms includes the right to acquire them without arbitrary government limits. This reinforced the fundamental nature of this liberty, and signaled that future gun laws would face intense scrutiny under the Bruin framework. For millions of law-abiding citizens in the Ninth Circuit, this ruling restored a fundamental aspect of liberty and reaffirmed their constitutional rights. Gun rights advocates hailed the decision as a long-overdue correction to decades of restrictive policies. The message from the court was clear: modern restrictions unsupported by history cannot stand, and the Constitution's original meaning must prevail. The ruling sent a strong signal to lawmakers that future gun control efforts would need to withstand rigorous historical scrutiny. The Ninth Circuit's decision marked a pivotal turning point for Second Amendment rights in the West, setting the stage for future legal battles and shaping the national conversation on gun rights for years to come. The confrontation between California's modern gun laws and America's constitutional tradition is far from over, but for now, the historical standard has prevailed. The Ninth Circuit's Nguyen decision closely followed the Supreme Court's Bruin standard, which fundamentally changed how courts evaluate Second Amendment cases. This approach is rooted in both the text of the amendment and the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. The first step asks, does the law restrict conduct that's actually protected by the Second Amendment's text, such as the right to keep and bear arms? Over time, courts have debated what keep and bear arms truly means, but landmark cases like District of Columbia v. Heller clarified that it protects an individual right, not just a collective one. The answer was yes. Buying firearms is a core part of exercising that constitutional right, and any law limiting that must be carefully scrutinized. Heller and later McDonald v. Chicago reinforced that the Second Amendment applies to both federal and state governments. Next, California had to prove its law fit within America's historical tradition of gun regulation, showing that similar restrictions existed at the time of the nation's founding. The Supreme Court in Bruin emphasized that only regulations consistent with the historical understanding of the right are permissible. The state failed. It couldn't point to any founding-era laws that rationed gun purchases or imposed waiting periods between them. Historical research revealed that early American laws focused on who could own arms, not how often they could be purchased. The court rejected California's attempts to compare its law to unrelated historical regulations, finding those analogies unconvincing and insufficient. Unlike restrictions on carrying weapons in sensitive places, there was no tradition of rationing lawful purchases. The panel found no historical precedent for telling citizens they must wait a month between firearm purchases, a requirement not seen in early American law. This analysis echoed the Supreme Court's insistence in Bruin and Heller that modern laws must be rooted in historical practice. This lack of historical support ultimately doomed the law, making it impossible for California to justify its restriction. The court's analysis highlighted how the Second Amendment's text, as interpreted by key Supreme Court cases, sets a high bar for modern regulations. The Bruin framework replaced subjective balancing tests with a clear historical inquiry, demanding real evidence from the relevant time period. This marks a shift from earlier approaches, where courts often weighed public safety against individual rights. In Nguyen, the law failed that test and was struck down as unconstitutional, reinforcing the importance of history and the Supreme Court's evolving interpretation of the Second Amendment in shaping modern gun laws. The Second Amendment Foundation, or SAF, has been a leading force in gun rights advocacy since its founding in 1974 by Alan Gottlieb. Over the decades, SAF has built a reputation for strategic litigation and public education, fighting for the rights of lawful gun owners across the nation. In Nguyen v. Bonta, SAF took decisive action as a lead plaintiff, funding and driving the litigation. Their legal team, led by experienced attorneys and guided by Gottlieb's vision, represented California gun owners who were denied their rights under the state's restrictive law. SAF's legal strategy was to leverage the Supreme Court's Bruin decision, arguing that California's one-gun-per-month law was unconstitutional. Their attorneys meticulously built the case, drawing on decades of experience in Second Amendment litigation. Alan Gottlieb, SAF's founder and executive vice president, called the ruling a monumental win. He emphasized that the decision affirms citizens cannot be subjected to arbitrary purchase quotas, and credited SAF's persistent legal work for the victory. Beyond the courtroom, SAF's public outreach and educational campaigns helped counter misinformation, inform the public, and highlight the broader significance of the decision. This victory not only impacts California, but also sets a template for challenging similar restrictive laws nationwide, continuing SAF's mission to defend and restore Second Amendment rights. With a dedicated leadership team and a history of landmark victories, the Second Amendment Foundation remains at the forefront of the fight for constitutional rights. After Nguyen v. Bonta, some commentators tried to frame the decision as a reversal for gun rights, but that's not accurate. Let's clarify the difference. A victory means the court sided with Second Amendment advocates, striking down the law. A reversal would mean the court undid a previous win for gun rights, which did not happen here. The Ninth Circuit's ruling was a clear legal win for those challenging California's ammunition law, reinforcing the strength of constitutional arguments in court. Misinformation about a supposed reversal has circulated online, often intended to confuse or discourage gun owners. In reality, the legal outcome was a step forward for gun rights. The Second Amendment Foundation, as a lead plaintiff, played a pivotal role in achieving this result, far from being on the losing side. This confusion underscores the importance of consulting primary legal sources and official court documents rather than relying on sensationalized headlines. Opponents of the ruling have tried to downplay the decision's impact, hoping to slow the momentum of gun rights advocates by distorting the facts. Legally, Nguyen v. Bonta sets a precedent that constitutional challenges to restrictive gun laws can succeed, sending a strong message to both sides of the debate. For gun rights supporters, this was an unambiguous victory, one that may influence future legal battles across the country. Nguyen v. Bonta, alongside Roe v. Bonta, is not just reshaping gun law in the Ninth Circuit. It's setting the stage for a wave of legal and political battles that could reverberate far beyond California, Oregon, and Washington. These landmark decisions are establishing new precedents that will guide how courts interpret the Second Amendment, and they're likely to influence legislative agendas and legal strategies in other states as well. With the Supreme Court's Bruin standard now binding across the circuit, all lower courts must evaluate gun laws through the lens of historical tradition, not just contemporary policy goals. This shift is already prompting lawmakers and advocacy groups to rethink their approaches. States will face greater challenges defending modern firearm restrictions, especially those without clear historical analogs. This could lead to a surge of new lawsuits targeting a wide range of gun regulations. Laws restricting so-called assault weapons, magazine capacities, or specific firearm types are now on shakier ground, and future cases may further test the limits of what states can regulate. The ruling also clarifies that the Second Amendment protects not just possession, but the right to acquire firearms, potentially impacting future cases about gun sales, background checks, and access. Restrictions like mandatory waiting periods, registration requirements, and other bureaucratic barriers are now vulnerable to legal challenges, and we can expect to see more cases contesting these laws in the near future. Politically, states with stricter gun laws can no longer assume their regulations will survive in court. The legal landscape demands stronger, historically grounded justifications for any firearm regulation, and this will likely shape legislative debates and election campaigns. As the Ninth Circuit becomes a battleground for Second Amendment rights, the ripple effects could inspire similar challenges and reforms in other circuits, potentially leading to a nationwide reevaluation of gun laws and constitutional rights. Even after this major legal victory, California is far from finished with its efforts. California's first likely move is to request an en banc review from the Ninth Circuit, asking a larger panel of judges to reconsider the decision. If that fails, the state could petition the U.S. Supreme Court, a process that could take several months to a year. Simultaneously, state lawmakers may draft new legislation designed to address the court's concerns while still imposing restrictions, potentially introducing bills in the next legislative session. Gun rights groups are already preparing for further legal challenges, anticipating both courtroom battles and legislative maneuvers over the coming year. Continued vigilance and support for advocacy organizations will be essential as these next steps unfold. The Ninth Circuit's recent rulings will serve as key legal precedents, shaping the arguments and strategies in the months ahead. While momentum currently favors Second Amendment advocates, the timeline for resolution could stretch over the next year or more, as both sides prepare for the next phase of this ongoing struggle. The Ninth Circuit's ruling has sparked immediate and passionate reactions across the nation. Supporters of gun rights have celebrated the decision as a milestone for constitutional freedoms, with advocacy groups and individuals sharing their excitement across social media and local news outlets. Meanwhile, gun control advocates have voiced deep concern, warning of potential risks to public safety, and vowing to continue the fight through legislative and grassroots efforts. Major media networks have provided extensive coverage, with legal analysts breaking down the implications and pundits debating the broader impact on American gun laws. Editorials and opinion pieces reflect the ongoing divide, highlighting how this case resonates far beyond California's borders. For viewers who want to stay updated or get involved, there are several ways to engage. Subscribing to newsletters from advocacy organizations, following reputable legal analysts and journalists on social media, and joining local community forums can provide timely updates and in-depth analysis. Many organizations also offer opportunities to participate in advocacy campaigns, attend town hall meetings, or support legal defense funds. As the legal and legislative battles continue, staying informed is crucial. By following trusted sources and engaging with your community, you can play a role in shaping the future of gun rights and regulations both in California and nationwide.